All right. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me OK? Excellent. Well, I have a bit of a cold, so I apologize in advance if I start coughing. Very excited to be here. Thank you very much, Nate and Mike, and thanks to Professor Stewart for the invitation. I'd also like to thank MIT for giving me a degree in Course 8. My GPA was approximately -10, but they didn't fuss about that. So for anyone in the room, undergrads, if you're struggling, hang in there. All right, we'll dive right in. My background, as Professor Stewart mentioned, is in electoral politics. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about how modern political campaigns use data and analytics to run their programs. So thinking about the overall themes of the Institute, of IDSS, and its mission, so IDSS is set out to address complex societal challenges. And thinking again about the ideas of data, systems, and society, political campaigns are sort of a great example of where these three ideas come together. Obviously, society in the United States is driven by, and to some extent, the people who govern us. And in the United States, we're lucky that we can make some of those decisions ourselves through democratic elections, for better or for worse. The systems that political campaigns use to operate are pretty remarkable, pretty complex, cover a lot of different fields, and campaigns are a big business these days. President Obama's re-election campaign in 2012 raised and spent around $1 billion and employed something like 5,000 people across the country, tens of thousands of volunteers active on behalf of the campaign. So to speak to all that, to make all that work, we have quite a lot of data. And it is a world that is getting very exciting for those of us who do electoral politics. And it's getting very much more widespread, where campaigns at all levels, previously it was just a presidential campaign that had the resources and the interest in doing this type of work. And now we're getting to the level where if you're running for mayor in a small town, you are thinking strategically about how can I use data to best run my campaign. So when we think about what campaigns are trying to accomplish, they're all very large and very complicated. But fundamentally, they can do only three things to impact the outcome of an election. And when we think about what's going on, when you watch the news, when you either cringe or smile, depending on who's on and what you see, all the campaigns are trying to do three things. You can register people to vote that aren't part of the political process now. You can persuade people that are perhaps undecided or leaning the other way to vote in your direction. And you can remind your supporters to go to the polls. Turnout, as we know, in the United States is comparatively low. Some countries have mandated voting. We don't have that. So particularly in democratic campaigns, this idea of voter mobilization is a huge part of the process. And all the data work that we do goes to allocating the different resources and the different tools the campaign has available to do those three things. So when we think about, again, trying to gain votes, we can do it through any of the three channels. Fundamentally, all of these are about trying to talk to and influence the electorate, the population of voters or potential voters in the United States or another country. How do you deal with the complexities of millions and millions of people that have very different ideas about politics, about the political process, about individual candidates, about parties, about anything? Well, we're data people. So the first thing we do is sort of try to get together what we know about voters. And I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly. I don't want to gloss over the fact that in the Democratic Party, it represents something like 4 years worth of work to assemble a very large data set on American voters, and this is what Democratic political campaigns and organizations are making use of today, including Hillary Clinton's campaign for president. So this idea was touched on by a couple of the people who have already spoken, that we have lots and lots of data that's relevant to elections and to how people vote and how people think about voting. Data practitioners can look at this information coming from numerous sources, and again, the Democratic political establishment made a really large effort from 2008 to 2012 to unify all these different pieces of information, where historically we knew that someone had gone to a particular household in Ohio, knocked on that door, the person said, yeah, I'm considering voting for John McCain. And we had a record of that piece of information. That lived over here. then we also, in a separate database, had a piece of information that said that person actually wound up donating to President Obama's campaign in 2008. These pieces of information didn't talk to each other. So again, coming back to the idea of data and systems, one of the fundamental systems that we have is the system that makes all our data kind of talk to each other and then make it all usable. Again, something that's come up already a couple times, which should indicate how important it is to this type of work, the voter file, list of all the registered voters in states. This does exist in some foreign countries, sort of different parameters depending on where you go, and even different parameters within the United States as when you talk about what is available on the voter file. Again, some of this information is public. Anyone who is working on a major campaign, a nationwide campaign, can look up the voter record of any registered voter in the United States. That obviously raises some questions. Some people are very freaked out when they hear that. But it's also something that we have made great use of. The fact that we can go to a voter and say, hey, we know that you voted in 2008 and didn't vote in 2010. We want to remind you to vote now in 2012. This is something that actually is very helpful in terms of motivating people to vote. This idea that people know that their record is public and that someone can come to them and say, what are you up to? Why are you not going out to vote? The URL here is the Ohio voter file. If you want to go to it, you can go download it, play around, lots of fun after the conference. So one of the getting into the analytics nitty-gritty just a little bit, predictive models, obviously tremendously helpful to campaigns. Coming back to this idea of how do you deal with the fact that the electorate is very large and complex? Well, one of the tools we have in our arsenal is predictive modeling. And political campaigns can build a lot of models predicting a lot of different voter behavior, opinions, thoughts, et cetera, on the individual level. So what we do is we say, OK, let's rank everyone in Ohio from 0 to 100, and that's a probability of how likely we think they are to vote for Hillary Clinton. Let's rank everyone from 0 to 100 as to their probability of going to vote, period, of simply getting out of the House and participating in the electoral process. This continues on in quite a lot of different ways. We model likelihood to vote early in person, to vote early by mail. We model people's interests in particular ideas, such as maybe I'm someone that's strongly motivated by the idea of stopping climate change. A campaign might then say, OK, we believe this person is particularly interested in one issue or another. When we communicate with them, we can focus on that issue more than others. Again, I can't really overemphasize how important the modeling has become. In 2012, predictive modeling drove basically all the major decisions that President Obama's campaign was making, both on the individual level. In other words, I'm a volunteer going out knocking doors in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. Which individual doors do I knock on as I walk down Elm Street? And what we do is you will see people out with a list where they go to number 3 Elm Street, then they skip over number 5, and they go to number 7 Elm Street. And there's reasons for that. Data. We also use these scores in the aggregate. For instance, surrogates, candidates themselves travel, go around, hold rallies, et cetera. They say, where is the greatest concentration of persuadable voters? Where should I go? We look at the data, and we suggest this particular part of town. Again, this extends to this use of data to drive different campaign activities extends to a lot of different areas. One of the big ones that we started in 2012 with President Obama's campaign was using it to guide TV advertising buys. This is, for those of you who follow politics, you'll know that probably the single biggest expense in large campaigns is television ad buys. And we are able now to take our the voters we want to reach, match that with data from cable companies, et cetera, and figure out what programming we should be advertising on to best reach the largest quantities of voters in the most cost-effective way. And so the chart here was getting at the index was something that we came up with that was essentially the ratio of persuadable voters to people that we didn't want to reach, looking at times of day on given stations. Again, I worked for President Obama. This may not be shocking when you look at the right side as to where we were not able to find a lot of targets. All right, so just in conclusion, I know I'm very short on time here. What does this mean? What does it mean that campaigns use data in this way? Well, there's a couple of broad topics we can think about there. Privacy is the obvious one. Do you want someone coming to your house asking you why you didn't vote in the last election? Is that too weird? Societal question. We have the information now. It's currently public. It may remain that way. It may not. We don't know. I do a lot of work in overseas elections, and privacy is certainly regulated very differently in the European Union than in the United States. And this idea of anyone being able to download the list of all registered voters in their jurisdiction, as you can with Ohio, is very alien to a lot of countries and very shocking, even more so than it is here. One perpetual question that comes up when you talk about this is, well, this makes candidates for elected office very disingenuous. They go here and they say one thing, they go over here and they say another thing. This is obviously a problem. I don't know if it's a problem, it's something that's always existed. Campaigns and candidates have always tailored their message to the people they're talking to. If you are at a college talking to a group of students, you're saying something different than what you're saying at the retirement home. The interesting thing that I would say that makes this perhaps more relevant today is that a lot of our channels for communication are getting more specific, whereas previously, perhaps a campaign would advertise on the nightly news, and that would go to a mass audience. But increasingly, we're able to just communicate with particular individuals in their own channels without hitting sort of the mass consumption. All right, wrapping up here. We have this idea that voters can be likely to participate, unlikely to participate, or somewhere in the middle. Campaigns kind of are increasingly not focusing on the people that we model to be very unlikely to participate. Does that have implications for creating a perpetual kind of underclass where you're not going to participate, so we're not going to talk to you, and it keeps going? And lastly, we're in an election that's very interesting. There are very interesting candidates running. What does data mean for all of this? What does data mean for the policies and so forth that we will potentially see after the next election? Thank you.